It was a calm summer evening in the bustling city of Marwick. The air carried the scent of blooming jasmine from the neighborhood gardens, and the golden light of the setting sun painted the skyscrapers with an amber glow. People were winding down after another hectic day, some at cozy cafes, others at the park enjoying the cool breeze. Among them was Ethan Hayes, a quiet and reserved man in his early 30s who, unlike most, walked unnoticed through life. Ethan wasn't the kind of person to turn heads. He didn't drive a flashy car, wear designer suits, or brag about his achievements on social media. Yet, those who knew him well respected him deeply, for beneath his modest demeanor lay an exceptional mind and a remarkable story, a story that was about to unfold in ways even Ethan couldn't predict. Earlier that day, the annual summit for young entrepreneurs had taken place at the prestigious Lancaster Auditorium. It was the kind of event where attendees showed up in luxury cars and boasted about their latest milestones. Ethan had been invited as a keynote speaker, but true to his nature, he had quietly declined the spotlight. Instead, he opted to sit in the back row as an observer. He had no desire to flaunt his success. He preferred to learn, observe, and remain in the shadows. As the event progressed, one individual, in particular, stood out, a charismatic young man named Marcus Steele. Marcus was the epitome of modern success. He walked with an air of confidence, his tailored suit shimmering under the stage lights. His presentation was packed with bold claims and dramatic gestures, the audience erupting in applause at every pause. But Ethan, seated in the shadows, saw something few others did. Beneath Marcus's glitz and glamour, there was a fragile need for validation, a hunger for recognition that overshadowed genuine substance. Ethan's mind wandered back to his own journey. He had faced similar temptations in the past, the urge to show off, to prove his worth to others, to chase after the applause. But life had taught him a different lesson. True success, he had come to believe, was like an iceberg. Most of it remained hidden beneath the surface. What mattered wasn't the applause but the quiet resilience, the discipline, and the ability to stay grounded when the world was watching. As the evening wore on, Marcus approached Ethan during a networking session. He didn't recognize the unassuming man before him, but struck up a conversation anyway. "What do you do?" Marcus asked, his tone polite but distracted as his eyes scanned the room for more influential figures. Ethan smiled faintly. "I work in technology," he replied, deliberately vague. "Oh, what kind of technology?" Marcus prodded, clearly uninterested, but fulfilling a social obligation. "Software development," Ethan said, offering no further details. Marcus nodded and quickly excused himself, leaving Ethan to sip his coffee in peace. Little did Marcus know, he had just dismissed the founder of one of the most innovative and influential tech startups in the country, a company that had revolutionized the industry in ways others could only dream of. Later that night, Ethan walked home through the quiet streets, his thoughts drifting. He couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus represented a growing trend, a society obsessed with appearances, where showing off often overshadowed substance. It wasn't judgment that fueled Ethan's thoughts, but a quiet determination to explore this phenomenon further. Back at his apartment, Ethan opened his laptop and began jotting down ideas. He wanted to create something that would challenge this mindset, a story that would inspire others to rethink their definition of success. But how? As his fingers hovered over the keyboard, an idea began to take shape, one that would soon set in motion events that neither Ethan nor Marcus could foresee. The next day, Ethan decided to take an unconventional approach. He reached out to Marcus with a simple message: "I enjoyed our brief conversation at the summit. I'd like to hear more about your journey. Let's meet for coffee." To Ethan's surprise, Marcus agreed. Perhaps it was curiosity or the allure of someone who didn't seem starstruck by his success. Whatever the reason, they arranged to meet at a small, unassuming cafe tucked away from the city's glitz. As they sat across from each other, the contrast between them was striking. Marcus, radiating confidence, his designer watch catching the light, and Ethan, in a plain button-down shirt, his expression calm and unreadable. The conversation began innocuously enough, with Marcus sharing stories of his rapid ascent to fame. But as the minutes ticked by, Ethan's quiet questions began to peel back the layers. Do you ever feel the pressure to maintain a certain image? Ethan asked casually, stirring his coffee. Marcus paused, caught off guard by the question. I mean, sure, he admitted with a shrug. But isn't that part of the game? People want to see success, so you give them what they want. Ethan nodded thoughtfully, his gaze steady. And what about when the applause fades? What keeps you going then? The question lingered in the air, heavier than Marcus had anticipated. For the first time, he found himself unsure of how to respond. And in that moment of silence, something shifted, a crack in the polished armor he had worked so hard to maintain. What Marcus didn't know was that this conversation was only the beginning. Ethan wasn't interested in judging him or proving a point. Instead, he saw an opportunity, a chance to share the art of quiet success, not through lectures or grand gestures, but through genuine connection and subtle influence. As they left the cafe that day, the sun dipping below the horizon, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he had met someone who saw through the facade he had so carefully constructed. And for Ethan, the encounter marked the start of a journey that would challenge not just Marcus, but an entire generation to rethink what it truly means to succeed. But the question remained, could someone like Marcus, so deeply entrenched in the world of showmanship, learn to embrace the power of quiet success? Or would the allure of the spotlight prove too strong? That, Ethan realized, was a story yet to be written. The following morning, Marcus sat at his desk, scrolling through his emails. He was used to seeing an endless stream of offers, partnership requests, and event invitations. But something about his meeting with Ethan the previous evening had stuck with him. It wasn't what Ethan said. It was how he said it. The calmness, the lack of urgency in his words, and the way he seemed completely unaffected by Marcus's polished persona. For someone like Marcus, who thrived on attention and validation, Ethan was a mystery. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He had built his image on being larger than life, on creating a sense of envy and awe wherever he went. Yet, here was this man, plain, unassuming, and entirely uninterested in showing off, who had managed to unsettle him. It didn't make sense. For the first time in years, Marcus felt the faintest crack in his confidence. As the day went on, Marcus tried to shake the feeling, throwing himself into meetings and calls. But every so often, Ethan's words crept back into his mind. What about when the applause fades? What keeps you going then? He had heard similar questions before, but never with the same weight. It was as if Ethan had asked not to challenge him, but to genuinely understand. By evening, curiosity got the better of Marcus. He found himself Googling Ethan Hayes, expecting to find a LinkedIn profile or maybe a small company website. What he discovered instead left him stunned. Ethan wasn't just a software developer as he'd casually claimed. He was the founder and CEO of EchoCore, a tech company that had revolutionized data encryption. Major publications had described him as a silent innovator and one of the most influential minds of his generation. Yet, despite all the accolades, there were no glossy interviews, no flashy headlines, no curated social media accounts. Ethan had somehow built an empire in complete silence. Marcus sat back, his mind racing. How had someone like Ethan managed to stay under the radar? In a world where success was measured in followers and likes, Ethan had chosen to remain invisible. It was the exact opposite of everything Marcus believed in. And yet, Ethan seemed happier, more grounded. The realization made Marcus uncomfortable in a way he couldn't quite explain. The next week, Ethan reached out again, this time inviting Marcus to visit his office. It's nothing fancy, he had written in the email, but it's where the magic happens. Marcus hesitated before accepting. He wasn't sure what he hoped to gain from this, but he couldn't deny his curiosity. When Marcus arrived at EchoCore's headquarters, he was surprised to find a modest building tucked away in a quiet part of the city. There were no grand signs or flashy logos, just a simple plaque by the door. Inside, the atmosphere was equally understated. Employees worked quietly at their desks, the hum of collaboration filling the air. The walls were decorated with hand-drawn charts and diagrams, giving the space a personal, almost homemade feel. Ethan greeted Marcus in the lobby, his expression as calm and welcoming as ever. "Glad you could make it," he said, shaking Marcus's hand. "Let me show you around." As they walked through the office, Ethan explained how EchoCore had started. "It wasn't about the money," he said simply. "I saw a problem, and I wanted to solve it. The rest just followed." Marcus listened, fascinated. There was no arrogance in Ethan's tone, no need to prove himself. He spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who knew his worth, but didn't need the world to acknowledge it. It was a stark contrast to Marcus's own approach, and for the first time, he began to wonder if he had been doing it all wrong. Ethan stopped at a small meeting room and gestured for Marcus to sit. On the table lay a stack of papers, each filled with notes and sketches. "This is where it all happens," Ethan said with a smile. "No big presentations, no dramatic pitches. Just ideas and the people who believe in them." Marcus picked up one of the papers, scanning the intricate diagrams. He was impressed, but more than that, he was intrigued by Ethan's process. There was no fanfare, no need for validation. It was pure, unfiltered passion. As the day went on, Ethan and Marcus talked about their respective journeys. Marcus found himself opening up in ways he hadn't expected, sharing stories of late nights, failed ventures, and the pressure to maintain his image. Ethan listened intently, his quiet presence encouraging Marcus to dig deeper. At one point, Ethan leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever feel like you're chasing a moving target?" he asked. Marcus nodded slowly. "All the time," he admitted. "No matter how much I achieve, it never feels like enough. There's always someone else doing more, someone else to impress." Ethan smiled faintly. "That's the thing about chasing applause," he said. "It's addictive, but it doesn't last. True success isn't about what others see. It's about what you build when no one's looking." The words hit Marcus like a ton of bricks. He had spent his entire career chasing the spotlight, but for what? The applause always faded, and the pressure to outdo himself only grew. He realized, in that moment, that he didn't even know what true success looked like for him. He had been so focused on impressing others that he had lost sight of his own goals. As Marcus left the office that evening, his mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. Ethan's words had stirred something deep within him, something he couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, Marcus felt a flicker of doubt, not in his abilities, but in the path he had chosen. But doubt wasn't the only thing he felt. There was also a sense of possibility, a nagging question that wouldn't leave him alone. What if there's another way? The answer, Marcus realized, wouldn't come easily. It would require him to confront his own insecurities, to let go of the need for constant validation. And most of all, it would require him to redefine what success meant, not for the world, but for himself. As he walked through the quiet streets of Marwick, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement, Marcus couldn't help but feel that his meeting with Ethan was only the beginning. There was a long road ahead, one filled with challenges and self-discovery. But for the first time in a long time, Marcus was willing to take that journey, not to prove himself to others, but to finally find peace within. What Marcus didn't realize was that this journey would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. And as he stood at the crossroads of his old life and the one Ethan had shown him, the question loomed larger than ever. Could he let go of the spotlight, or would its pull prove too strong? The answer, as always, remained just out of reach. The days following Marcus's visit to EchoCore were a blur of conflicting emotions. His polished routine, usually filled with confidence and ease, suddenly felt hollow. He went to meetings, gave speeches, and posted updates on social media, but everything felt performative. For the first time, he started questioning the very foundation of his career, the choices he had made, the people he had surrounded himself with, and the goals he had been chasing. Late one night, Marcus found himself scrolling through his own Instagram feed. Post after post showcased his carefully curated life: luxury vacations, red carpet events, expensive cars, and designer suits. To the world, it was the epitome of success. But as he stared at the smiling faces and dazzling backdrops, Marcus felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years: emptiness. The likes and comments that had once brought him satisfaction now felt meaningless, like chasing shadows. Meanwhile, Ethan went about his life as if nothing had changed. He continued to lead his team at EchoCore, quietly working on projects that would shape the future of technology. Yet, he couldn't ignore the thought of Marcus and the subtle transformation he had sensed during their conversations. Ethan had seen people like Marcus before, ambitious, talented, but trapped in a cycle of external validation. Most never broke free, but there was something different about Marcus. Beneath the bravado, Ethan saw a flicker of curiosity, a yearning for something deeper. One afternoon, Marcus decided to visit an old friend, someone he hadn't spoken to in years. Daniel Torres had been his roommate in college, back when life was simpler and dreams were untainted by the need for recognition. Daniel was now a teacher, living a modest life with his wife and 2 kids. When Marcus arrived at Daniel's home, he was greeted warmly, the smell of fresh coffee wafting through the air. The house was small but cozy, filled with laughter and the sound of children playing. As they sat on the porch, Marcus shared bits and pieces of his recent doubts. Daniel listened patiently, his expression thoughtful. "You know," Daniel said after a long pause, "you always had this spark, Marcus. Even back in college, you were the guy everyone looked up to. But somewhere along the way, it seems like you started chasing what everyone else wanted instead of figuring out what you wanted." Marcus frowned, the weight of Daniel's words sinking in. "What if I don't know what I want anymore?" he asked quietly. Daniel smiled. "Then maybe it's time to stop looking outward for answers. You've spent so long building this image of success that you've forgotten to ask yourself if it's the right one." The conversation stayed with Marcus long after he left. Daniel's life was a stark contrast to his own, simple, unpretentious, yet full of genuine happiness. It was a reminder that success didn't have to be loud or extravagant. It could be quiet, personal, and deeply fulfilling. Back in the city, Marcus began to notice things he had previously overlooked. He saw the quiet strength in the barista who greeted every customer with a smile, despite working long hours. He noticed the determination in the street artist painting a mural in the alley, undeterred by the lack of an audience. These moments, though small, began to shift his perspective. Success wasn't about who shouted the loudest. It was about staying true to oneself, even when no one was watching. But Marcus's journey wasn't without its challenges. His public persona, carefully crafted over the years, was not something he could shed overnight. Every time he considered stepping back, he was met with resistance from his peers, his followers, and even himself. The fear of being forgotten loomed large. What if he faded into obscurity? What if everything he had worked for lost its value? The questions gnawed at him, keeping him awake at night. Ethan, sensing Marcus's inner turmoil, decided to reach out once more. This time, he invited Marcus to a weekend retreat, an off-the-grid experience designed to disconnect from the noise of the world and reconnect with oneself. "It's not about meditation or anything spiritual," Ethan had explained. "It's just a chance to slow down and think without distractions." Marcus hesitated at first. The idea of being completely cut off from his phone and the internet felt almost unbearable. But something about Ethan's invitation resonated with him. Reluctantly, he agreed. The retreat was held at a cabin in the mountains, surrounded by dense forests and serene lakes. There were no schedules, no planned activities, just quiet solitude. The first day was excruciating for Marcus. Without his phone to distract him, he felt restless, his thoughts racing uncontrollably. He paced the cabin, his mind replaying every missed notification, every potential opportunity slipping away. By the second day, however, something began to shift. Without the constant noise of the outside world, Marcus found himself noticing the little things, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the distant call of a bird, the warmth of sunlight on his face. It was as if the silence was forcing him to confront parts of himself he had long ignored. Ethan, true to his word, didn't offer any advice or guidance. He simply shared the space, occasionally asking thought-provoking questions, but never pushing for answers. "What's the one thing you've been too afraid to let go of?" he asked one evening as they sat by the fire. The question lingered in Marcus's mind long after Ethan had gone to bed. What was he afraid of? Was it failure? Or was it something deeper, something more personal? As the fire crackled and the stars twinkled overhead, Marcus felt a clarity he hadn't experienced in years. He didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, he realized he didn't need them. The journey itself was enough. When the retreat ended, Marcus returned to the city with a new perspective. He didn't make any dramatic changes, at least not immediately. But he began to approach life differently, taking small steps to align his actions with his newfound understanding of success. He turned down a high-profile speaking engagement, choosing instead to mentor a group of young entrepreneurs. He started spending more time with Daniel and his family, finding comfort in their simple, honest way of living. Yet the tension remained. The pull of his old life was strong, and the fear of fading into obscurity lingered in the back of his mind. Could he truly embrace this quieter path, or would the allure of the spotlight eventually draw him back? The question hung over him like a shadow, its answer still uncertain. As Marcus stood at the crossroads of his old life and the one Ethan had shown him, he knew one thing for sure: the journey ahead would not be easy. But for the first time, he was willing to take the risk, not for the applause, not for the recognition, but for the chance to discover who he truly was beneath it all. Marcus thought he was making progress, but the closer he got to this new version of himself, the harder it became to resist the siren call of his old life. The world he had built wasn't going to let him go quietly. His inbox overflowed with invites to exclusive events, brand collaborations, and high-profile partnerships. Each email was a reminder of what he could lose: prestige, admiration, relevance. The temptation to jump back into the spotlight was almost unbearable. Then came the message that tested everything: an invitation to keynote one of the largest industry conferences of the year. It wasn't just an opportunity to showcase his success, it was the kind of event that could solidify his legacy. The offer was a golden ticket, one most people in his field would kill for. His name would be on billboards, his speech broadcasted to millions. For a fleeting moment, the old Marcus stirred inside him, whispering that this was his chance to remind the world who he was. But as he stared at the email, another voice emerged, quieter but firm. Ethan's words from the retreat echoed in his mind. True success isn't about what others see. It's about what you build when no one's looking. The idea of standing on stage, delivering a speech crafted to dazzle the masses, suddenly felt hollow. Yet the fear of turning it down loomed large. Would he disappear if he stepped away from the limelight? Was this a chance he couldn't afford to pass up? Unable to make a decision, Marcus reached out to Ethan, who suggested meeting for coffee. When Marcus arrived, Ethan was already seated at a small table by the window, sipping tea. His demeanor was as calm as ever, a stark contrast to Marcus's restless energy. Without waiting for Marcus to explain, Ethan spoke. "You're at a crossroads," he said, "and you're scared. That's normal." Marcus exhaled sharply, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "It's easy for you to say. You've already found your path. I feel like I'm stuck between two worlds, and I don't know which one to choose." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. "What are you really afraid of, Marcus? That people will forget you? Or that you'll forget yourself?" The question hit harder than Marcus expected. He had always told himself he feared irrelevance, but deep down, he knew the truth. He wasn't afraid of being forgotten. He was afraid of realizing that everything he had built was meaningless without an audience. The realization left him speechless. Ethan continued, his tone gentle but firm. "You don't have to make a grand declaration or burn bridges. But you do need to decide who you're living for, your audience or yourself. No one else can make that choice for you." The conversation left Marcus more conflicted than ever. For days, he wrestled with his decision, torn between the life he had known and the one he was beginning to glimpse. The pressure mounted as the conference approached, each passing day a reminder that time was running out. Even Daniel, usually a source of calm, noticed the strain on Marcus and encouraged him to take a step back. But Marcus didn't step back. Instead, he threw himself into work, hoping that staying busy would quiet his mind. It didn't. The more he tried to ignore the conflict, the louder it became, until one sleepless night, he found himself standing on his balcony, staring out at the city lights. The skyline was beautiful, a testament to ambition and innovation. But for the first time, it didn't inspire him. It felt distant, cold, and unattainable. As he stood there, his phone buzzed with a notification. A friend had tagged him in a post, congratulating him on being invited to keynote the conference. The caption read, "The King of Success, back to claim his throne." The words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Was that who he wanted to be? A king ruling over a world of appearances, always striving to maintain a facade? The next morning, Marcus did something he hadn't done in years. He turned off his phone, grabbed a notebook, and went to a quiet park near his apartment. Sitting on a bench beneath a large oak tree, he opened the notebook and began to write. For hours, he poured his thoughts onto the page, his fears, his dreams, his regrets. By the time he looked up, the sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the park. In that moment, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years: clarity. He realized that the life he had built wasn't entirely wrong. It just wasn't entirely his. The path Ethan had shown him wasn't about abandoning everything he knew. It was about finding a balance. The applause didn't have to stop, but it couldn't be the only thing driving him. He needed to redefine success on his own terms, even if it meant walking a path fewer people would notice. But knowing that and living it were two very different things. As the conference drew closer, Marcus felt the tension building. The world expected him to show up, to dazzle and inspire. He could already picture the standing ovation, the glowing headlines. It would be so easy to step back into the spotlight, to let the applause drown out the doubts. Yet, a part of him hesitated. What if this was his chance to make a statement, not just to the world, but to himself? What if he chose not to play the game for once? The thought terrified him, but it also exhilarated him. He was standing on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to leap or retreat. And the clock was ticking. The night before the conference, Marcus sat alone in his apartment, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He barely recognized the man looking back at him, torn between two lives, two identities. The choice he made in the next 24 hours would define his future. But which future would he choose? The one where the applause never stopped, or the one where he learned to stand in silence? As Marcus sat in his apartment, the weight of the impending decision pressed heavily on him. The quiet of the night was broken only by the faint hum of the city below, but even that felt distant, as though the world had slowed down to force him into a moment of reckoning. He reached for the notebook he had used in the park, flipping through its pages. The words stared back at him, raw and unfiltered, a mirror of his inner turmoil. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of resolve, a sense that he could choose a quieter, more meaningful path. But just as he began to lean into this newfound clarity, his phone buzzed. Marcus hesitated before picking it up, wary of being pulled back into the noise he was trying to escape. It was a message from an unknown number. The text read, "Don't let them define you. Call me." Below the message was a phone number, but no name. Marcus stared at the screen, his mind racing. Who was this? How did they have his number? And what did they mean by, "Don't let them define you"? Curiosity got the better of him. Against his better judgment, he dialed the number. The call connected on the first ring, and a familiar voice greeted him. "Marcus," the voice said calmly, "it's Ethan." Relief washed over him, but confusion quickly followed. "Ethan? Why didn't you just call me yourself? Why the cryptic message?" "I needed to get your attention," Ethan replied, his tone serious. "I wasn't sure if you'd answer otherwise. Look, there's something I need to tell you, and I couldn't risk saying it over text." Marcus's heart began to race. "What's going on?" he asked, the unease creeping into his voice. There was a pause on the other end, and then Ethan said, "The conference. It's not what it seems." Marcus frowned, his mind struggling to keep up. "What do you mean?" "It's just a keynote. What could be wrong with that?" Ethan sighed. "It's more than just a keynote, Marcus. The organizers reached out to me a few weeks ago. They wanted me to be the keynote speaker, but I turned them down. When I asked why they were so eager, they let something slip. They're not just looking for someone to inspire, they're looking for someone to promote their agenda. They want you to sell their brand, their vision, and their products, all under the guise of a motivational speech. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Wait, what? Are you saying this whole thing is a setup? That they don't care about what I have to say? Ethan's voice was steady but urgent. They care about what you represent. You're the perfect face for their narrative, success, ambition, everything they want to associate with their brand. But they don't care about you, Marcus. They care about the image you project. Marcus felt his pulse quicken. The invitation had felt too good to be true, but he had brushed it off as paranoia. Now, the cracks in the facade were starting to show. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He demanded. I wasn't sure how to approach it, Ethan admitted. I thought you'd figure it out on your own. But when I saw your name on the announcement, I knew I had to say something. You have a choice here, Marcus. You can play their game, or you can walk away. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to process the revelation. The conference wasn't just about him, it was about using him as a pawn in a larger scheme. If he went through with it, he'd be endorsing something he didn't believe in. But if he walked away, he risked alienating his audience and jeopardizing his career. The stakes were higher than ever, and the weight of the decision felt suffocating. Before Marcus could respond, Ethan added, There's something else you should know. You're not the only one they approached after I turned them down. They reached out to another speaker, a young entrepreneur named Rachel Nguyen. She said yes, but then she backed out at the last minute. She's been getting anonymous threats ever since. Marcus's stomach turned. Threats? What kind of threats? Emails, messages, even a note left on her car. Ethan said grimly. She's okay, but she's shaken. I think they're trying to intimidate her into silence. And if you back out, there's a chance they'll come after you too. The air seemed to leave the room. This wasn't just a moral dilemma anymore. It was a dangerous game. The conference organizers were more ruthless than Marcus had imagined, and the risks of standing up to them were becoming alarmingly clear. But the thought of being complicit in their agenda was even more unbearable. As Marcus sat in silence, Ethan said, I know this isn't easy. But remember what I told you. True success isn't about what others see. It's about what you can live with. If you go through with this, you need to ask yourself if you'll be able to look in the mirror afterward. The line went quiet as Ethan's words hung in the air. Marcus didn't know what to say. His entire career had been built on the image of success, but now that image felt like a trap. The decision he made in the next few hours would define not just his career, but who he was as a person. As the call ended, Marcus sat in the dim light of his apartment, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had always thought of himself as a man in control, but now he felt like a pawn in someone else's game. The question was no longer whether he would keynote the conference, it was whether he could find the courage to walk away from everything he had built. And if he did, what kind of consequences would follow? The night before the conference, Marcus didn't sleep. He sat in the same chair he had been in hours earlier, replaying Ethan's words in his mind. His thoughts were a whirlwind. What if Ethan was wrong? What if turning this down meant throwing away everything he had worked for? But another, quieter voice crept in, one that asked a different question. What if Ethan was right? What if walking away wasn't an end, but the beginning of something better? By morning, Marcus had made his decision. It wasn't easy, but there was a strange calm in the certainty of it. He sent a polite but firm email to the conference organizers, thanking them for the opportunity but declining to participate. He kept the message professional, citing personal reasons, but he made it clear there would be no negotiation. Once he hit send, he turned his phone off, knowing the fallout would come soon enough. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel relief. But it didn't last long. That afternoon, a knock at his door startled him. He hadn't been expecting anyone, and his stomach churned with unease as he approached. When he opened the door, there was no one there, only a small, unmarked envelope on the ground. He picked it up cautiously and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper with 3 words scrawled in black ink. You'll regret this. Marcus's pulse quickened as he stared at the note. The letters were jagged, hurried, as though written in anger. He glanced up and down the hallway, but it was empty. The realization hit him like a wave. This was real. The threats Ethan had mentioned weren't just warnings. They were promises. Whoever was behind this wasn't going to let him walk away without consequences. Despite the fear gnawing at him, Marcus refused to back down. He reached out to Ethan, who wasn't surprised by the development. "I had a feeling they'd try something like this," Ethan said. "But don't let them scare you. Bullies only have power if you let them. Besides, you're not alone in this." Ethan's words were reassuring, but the tension didn't ease. That evening, Marcus decided to take a walk to clear his head. As he strolled through the city streets, he noticed a car following him at a slow, deliberate pace. His heart raced as he quickened his step, ducking into a crowded coffee shop to lose his pursuers. When he finally returned to his apartment, he double-checked the locks on his doors and windows, his sense of safety eroding with every passing minute. The next morning, headlines about his absence from the conference began to circulate. Speculation ran rampant. Some praised him for stepping away, citing integrity, while others accused him of arrogance or irresponsibility. The conference organizers issued a vague statement, but Marcus noticed something strange. Rachel Nguyen, the entrepreneur Ethan had mentioned, was now listed as the replacement keynote speaker, despite her supposed withdrawal. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Marcus reached out to Rachel. It took some convincing, but she agreed to meet him in a discreet location. When they sat down, she looked tired and wary, her confidence seemingly diminished. "They cornered me," she admitted. "After I backed out, they made it clear that if I didn't comply, my reputation and my business would be ruined. I didn't have a choice." Marcus felt a surge of anger, but also a deep sense of responsibility. He couldn't stand by and let this continue. Together, he and Rachel decided to expose the truth. They reached out to a trusted journalist, someone with a reputation for uncovering corruption, and shared everything they knew. The journalist agreed to investigate, promising to keep their identities anonymous for the time being. Over the next week, the tension reached a boiling point. Marcus stayed off social media and avoided public appearances, knowing he was under scrutiny. He kept in close contact with Ethan and Rachel, who were equally on edge. But then, something unexpected happened. An anonymous whistleblower from within the conference's organizing committee came forward, corroborating their story and providing documents that revealed the true extent of the manipulation. The story broke like a tidal wave. Headlines exposed the conference as a thinly veiled marketing scheme, orchestrated by a conglomerate seeking to exploit its speakers for profit. The public backlash was immediate and overwhelming. The organizers issued frantic apologies, but the damage was done. Their credibility was in shambles, and the conference was canceled. In the aftermath, Marcus found himself at a crossroads once again. The exposure had come at a cost. His involvement in the scandal, even as a whistleblower, had drawn criticism from some corners. But for the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel the need to defend himself. He had made the right choice, and he could live with that. The twist came a few weeks later when Marcus received an email from a small, independent organization that hosted intimate, no-frills conferences focused on authenticity and community. They invited him to speak, not as a keynote, but as part of a panel discussion about ethical leadership. The irony wasn't lost on him. This wasn't the kind of stage he had once dreamed of, but it felt more meaningful than anything he had done before. As Marcus stood backstage, waiting for his turn to speak, he caught a glimpse of his reflection in a nearby mirror. This time, he recognized the man staring back. He wasn't a king, a brand, or a spectacle. He was just Marcus, flawed, evolving, and finally free to define success on his own terms. As Marcus stepped onto the modest stage, the warm light above him felt different, softer, more inviting than the glaring spotlights he had once sought. The room was intimate, filled with a small but attentive audience. These weren't people looking to be dazzled by grandiosity. They were here to listen, to connect, and to share in something real. For a fleeting moment, Marcus felt the familiar pang of nerves, but it wasn't the paralyzing kind. It was the kind that reminded him he cared about what he was about to say. He took a deep breath and began. His words weren't rehearsed, nor were they polished to perfection, but they came from a place of truth. He spoke about the allure of success, the dangers of losing oneself in the pursuit of it, and the importance of standing by one's values when the stakes are high. He shared the mistakes he had made and the lessons he had learned, not as someone who had it all figured out, but as someone still navigating the journey. The audience's response wasn't thunderous applause or standing ovations. Instead, it was quiet nods, reflective smiles, and a sense of connection that filled the room. And that was enough. For the first time in a long time, Marcus didn't feel like he was performing. He felt like he was simply sharing a conversation with people who understood. After the panel concluded, Marcus lingered in the room, chatting with attendees. Some approached him with questions, others with stories of their own struggles with authenticity and ambition. He met a young artist who confessed she often felt pressured to compromise her vision to gain recognition, and a small business owner who struggled with staying true to her ethics in a competitive industry. Their stories reminded Marcus of his own journey and the reasons he had made the choices he did. As the evening wound down, Marcus sat by himself in the corner of the room, sipping on a cup of lukewarm coffee. Rachel approached him, a soft smile on her face. "You were great up there," she said. "It felt real, you know? Not like some scripted performance." Marcus chuckled. "That's because it wasn't. I think I finally realized I don't have to be anything other than myself." Rachel nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You know, it's funny. For so long, I thought success was about being seen, being recognized, admired, celebrated. But now, I'm starting to think it's more about the quiet moments. The ones where you can look at yourself and feel at peace." Her words resonated deeply with Marcus. He had spent so much of his life chasing a version of success defined by others, but the peace she described was something he had only recently begun to understand. It wasn't about the accolades or the recognition. It was about integrity, about doing work that aligned with his values and connected him to others in a meaningful way. As they left the venue, Marcus and Rachel walked side by side through the quiet streets. The city lights cast a warm glow on the pavement, and the air was cool and crisp. They talked about their plans for the future, not in grand terms, but in small, intentional ways. Rachel was considering starting a mentorship program for young entrepreneurs, while Marcus was thinking about writing a book, not to impress anyone, but to share his journey in a way that might help others. In the weeks that followed, Marcus found himself embracing a slower, quieter pace of life. He took long walks in the park, spent time with close friends he had neglected during his rise to fame, and reconnected with hobbies he had long forgotten. He even started journaling again, not for an audience, but for himself. The act of putting pen to paper felt grounding, a reminder of the simplicity he had once cherished. The journalist who had helped expose the conference's corruption kept in touch, occasionally updating Marcus and Rachel on the fallout. The scandal had led to significant changes within the industry, with calls for greater transparency and accountability in how events were organized and marketed. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step in the right direction. One day, Marcus received a package in the mail. Inside was a small, handwritten note from Ethan, along with an old photo of the two of them at a local charity event from years ago. The note read, "This is the Marcus I remember. Glad to have him back." Marcus smiled, a wave of gratitude washing over him. Ethan had been there from the beginning, not just as a friend, but as a voice of reason when Marcus had needed it most. The final twist came in the form of a letter from a young man named Kevin, who had been in the audience at the smaller conference. Kevin wrote about how he had been struggling with similar feelings of self-doubt and pressure to conform, but hearing Marcus speak had given him the courage to make a difficult decision, to leave a toxic job and start his own nonprofit. He thanked Marcus for being honest and vulnerable, for showing him that success didn't have to come at the cost of one's soul. Marcus read the letter twice, his eyes lingering on the final line, "You didn't just inspire me. You reminded me that it's okay to choose a different path." It was a simple message, but it carried more weight than any award or accolade he had ever received. As Marcus folded the letter and placed it on his desk, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The path he had chosen wasn't the easiest, nor was it the most glamorous, but it was his. And that, he realized, was the art of quiet success, not the loud, flashy victories, but the quiet, steady moments of staying true to oneself. Looking out the window at the city skyline, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time, he felt ready for whatever came next. Success, he had learned, wasn't about being on top. It was about finding peace in the choices you make and knowing, deep down, that they are yours. And that was more than enough.